Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Liz Heisler. I am the PRC Saltillo Regional Consultant in Central Illinois and Northwest Illinois, so live about 2 hours straight west of Chicago. Everybody knows where that is. So it is just about noon here. I'm in Central Time, and I will be your presenter today for AAC Ready, Set, Goal Part 1. So we will probably go ahead and get started. I'm excited to have everyone here today. I love that everyone started to use the chat window already. That's awesome. Today's handout, just so you guys know, and what I pointed out before, will contain a lot of table of contents. It's going to go over what we will review for today and tomorrow. Even though today's session is just an hour, we will meet up hopefully all again tomorrow for tomorrow's Ready, Set, Goal Part 2, and that'll review the second half of what you see in your material section. So like I said, please look at that resource. It's a wonderful resource, and it'll really allow you to kind of follow along throughout this PowerPoint and presentation. So just a few things about me. I'm going to go ahead and just share my camera quickly so you guys know who the face is behind the voice, right? So hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I am a PRC Saltillo consultant. Like I said before, I cover Central Illinois. Just so you guys know, this presentation will focus exclusively on Saltillo products and applications. It will not include, other information regarding similar related products or applications. Just a disclosure for everyone. So I am an employee owner of PRC Saltillo. I'm also a member of ISHA, which is Illinois Speech and Language Hearing Association, ASHA, and an ASHA SIG 12 member. We are really here to share ideas and resources, give you somewhere to start. As a consultant, one of my roles includes meeting with teams and providing coaching about AAC implementation, typically after a client receives a device. And I often get questions like, do you know of a good AAC goal bank? Or we've tackled this skill, what should we do next? What does an AAC goal look like? Where should I start? So we wanted to give people resources, ideas, and somewhere to start. We really want to provide people with a framework for thinking about goals, a way to think through how to craft a meaningful goal for someone who uses AAC. Okay. So creating goals and objectives for someone using AAC can be challenging, right? But why? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, I think, but these things come to the top of my mind. Sometimes it's not knowing enough about AAC. Sometimes language learning is different for people who use AAC. Other times I know I worked in the schools prior to this role, and there are a lot of things to work on, right? There's so many things. Where do I even begin? This is another thing that really hits home for me. Changes in progress may be subtle or hard to measure. Okay, I've seen that before with kids. that just the one first thing you get, it might be really small, it might be hard to measure, but you know that it's a huge success. But how do I show that in an IEP? And you need to consider environments and partners too. Who are they going to be around most of the time? Okay, so these are some of the things that, a little bit briefly, so, that's what led us to create this training, honestly, was just hearing from all of you. So for part 1 today, we're going to go through the AAC goal framework. We're going to review a case study that we're going to use for the rest of the trainings today and tomorrow, and then we'll go over linguistic competence and operational competence. Okay, and then part 2, which I'll review tomorrow, would be social competence, strategic competence, making goals smart, and monitoring progress. Right, so we won't really talk about that today, but you'll get a feel for how it'll flow as we go through this. So Jane Corsten is an SLP who created Every Move Counts, which is a program for building communication in individuals with significant sensory motor difficulties. In her workshop, she asked the same question, why do we write goals for people to do something they cannot do to get something they do not want? This really resonates with me because there's some situations I encounter working as a clinician and now working in a coaching role with teams who are writing goals for AAC, and this does happen. And we want to make sure we are writing goals that facilitate communication and not a compliance routine, right? We want success, and in order to do that, we have to build lots of positive associations with communication and language. So I'm going to say that one more time. We want to make sure we are writing goals that facilitate communication, not compliance, okay? So I really think this is important, and this will kind of highlight some of the things I talk about today, but just something to keep in the back of your mind, right? So we can really build success by having a baseline and knowing what it is about that person cares to communicate about. So just like the slide says, we want to be able to focus on the individual's interests and abilities of our clients and students. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you this goal framework. So we have this GPS analogy to help us understand the goal framework. To obtain directions on our GPS, or now our phones, smartphones and everything, Google Maps, whatever you're using, not only do we need the destination, but we also need to know where we are starting from in order to know how we will get there. I think many times we think that the goal is the final destination, but is it? Right? Should we consider, are there other benchmarks that may show progress towards that destination along the way? Do we need to think about the directions that get you to the final destination as the treatment plan? Right? So we may use different terminology. There are goals, objectives, benchmarks. Today we don't want to get lost, and tomorrow we don't want to get lost in the details and technicalities. We want to help you figure out how to determine and reach your desired result. Okay? Because truly, the underlying intention of the goal is to identify what is expected to change as the result of this intervention. Okay, so it's kind of taking a step back and looking at, all right, what is the goal? Like, not thinking about maybe how it looks in your whatever system you're using, whether it's an IEP system, whether it's in a clinic-based, hospital-based system. Just knowing that underlying intention of the goal is to identify what is expected to change as a result of this intervention. So moving forward, when we reviewed the AAC and goal writing literature and pulling from personal experiences as SLPs and consultants, we created 3 important frameworks to use to create an AAC goal worksheet. These include the communicative competencies, goal attainment scaling, and SMART terminology. I'm sure you are all familiar with SMART, but I will review that. So this is what it looks like. Each of these 3 elements that were in the funnel were incorporated into the development of the form. So I'm going to go over each of them briefly here. So you can kind of see this is the goal framework. Again, you have this in your handout. So we start with those communicative competencies. You see the goal attainment scale and the SMART goals at the end. So let's start on the top with the 4 communicative competencies. Communicative competence is defined by Light and Binger in 1998 as the ability to communicate functionally in natural environments and to meet daily communication needs. So they can be divided into 4 interrelated domains or areas. So some of you might have heard this before as the LOS framework, but you have linguistic, operational, social, and strategic. So what that looks like, and we'll go through each of these in more depth as we go through the training, but as an overview, the linguistic competence is the ability to use and understand language, right? The operational competency refers to the technical skills to use the AAC system. Social competency is the ability to use and understand rules of interaction. And the strategic competency relates more to the use of compensatory strategies to overcome obstacles and prevent and repair communication breakdowns. So if you have these sufficient language skills and know how to use the system, have strategies when things don't work, and understand the rules of interaction, you are on your way of becoming that competent, successful communicator. Therefore, when you write goals, it's important to consider each of these areas for the person using AAC. Might be identifying their areas of weakness and skills that need to be taught and or improved to make your client a competent communicator. So next is the inclusion of the goal attainment scale. So we're kind of moving through this goal framework worksheet now. This is your tool to help define and organize your path. So this was originally developed back in 1968 by Kursick and Sherman as a way to measure behavioral change in the mental health field. It's since grown in popularity in other fields, including early intervention, occupational therapy, and more recently speech language therapy as it relates to people who use AAC. It is a way to measure progress towards behavioral goals and objectives where traditional outcome criteria, right, so like percentages and trials, don't always clearly capture progress. It also helps measure and compare progress across goals. So you'll kind of see this here as I show you. So here you'll have a starting point, that baseline, and we want to think about stimulability. Where do they have some emerging skills that we can make a goal we're about to write? Then level 3, we look at, oh, that expected destination given the timeline and setting. So, you know, an IEP year, 10 approved insurance visits to a clinic, 1 month of rehab, you know, what does that look like there? And then long-term hope. And it does not equal 100% here. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but you know, we don't need 100% accuracy. This is usually going to be the level 3 goal in a generalized context. Okay, so I'll get into that. It'll start making sense when you guys see this a little bit more. But if you're thinking about, you know, where are we today? Where do we want to be in the future? And how do we get there? That's kind of what this is supposed to do and help you do. So, you know, the first thing, we don't want to write for something they cannot do. So we want to make sure we're given a good starting point. But at the same time, we don't need 100% accuracy. You all know that, you know, I make grammar mistakes, right, as a speech language pathologist. Our best AAC users continue, I mean, they'll make little inaccuracies and things like that, but that is not the goal. You know, the goal is to become this competent communicator. And I think that's, again, you know, going back to the goal is to be able to communicate. It's not for compliance. So just something to think about as we go through it. And like I said, it'll make more sense as you see it being used. So the final element of the goal framework is that SMART terminology. This is purposely positioned at the bottom of the form as the initial focus is on getting the content of our goals. SMART then helps us fine-tune our writing and ensure we have included all necessary components to be considered quality goals and objectives. So like the goal attainment scale, SMART framework is not unique to AAC. You've probably all seen it before. It's been used widespread with individual letters sometimes taking on different meanings. In this context, we want to make sure our goals and objectives are specific or clear so that someone else, including the person using the AAC, can easily understand it. We want to make sure they're measurable so we can show progress and know when we have achieved that desired outcome. We want to make sure they're agreed upon so that we are sure to support all the desires of the entire team, especially the person who uses AAC and his or her family. You know, I had a client once and I was training them on how to use a brand new device, and the mom had told me, I just said, oh, can you just give me a little background about your child? And she said, you know what frustrates her the most about communication is the fact that her 2 younger brothers can talk to Alexa and Alexa will play what they want, but she really tries, and because she's unintelligible, it's really hard for her to get that. Okay, so in that case, you know, that's something really motivating, that's exciting for her. So you know what the first thing I showed on the device was? I mean, this was on a NovaChat 8, Word Power 60 Basic if you're familiar, but I showed them how to get to Alexa. And I think for them, that was so motivating. That was important to the family. That was important to use for the person who uses AAC. So, you know, thinking about that agreed upon, I think, is really important, and we'll get more into that. But making sure it's realistic and relevant. Again, realistic given the knowledge, time, and age, and availability of resources. You know, I think about, you know, working with those 22-year-olds, right, that are maybe just transitioned out of high school or about to transition out of high school into, you know, more different roles, maybe group homes or employment or different things like that. And you know, maybe instead of working on some things, maybe we're working on Facebook. Maybe we're working on, you know, being able to order coffee at the restaurant or something like that, like making sure they're realistic and relevant. And then time-based, so we know how much time we have to work towards it. Right? So things to think about. So I'm going to introduce a case study today, so which we'll use to practice writing and brainstorming goals and objectives using that form I just showed. So our case study is going to focus on Matthew. He is a 6-year-old boy with autism. His fine motor, vision, and hearing are within normal limits, but he does not like loud noises. Right? He received a NovaChat 2 months ago, and he's using Word Power 60 Basic. He uses some signs and some words on his device to communicate. All right, so that's what we know about him. This, I think, is equally as important. Because what's really important to know and understand is what motivates him. What does he like to do? What might he want to control or communicate about? So we know he loves snacks. He loves Disney and the iPad, reading and music. He loves to swing. He loves playing Simon Says. He loves the ball. You know, we're going to keep these in mind as we write his goals. Just like that other girl I talked about who really wanted to work Alexa. These are some things to think about and just keep in the back of our mind so we know what's going to motivate them and what they want to communicate about. All right, so we're going to start with the linguistic competency. So we're going to review, you know, each linguistic competency and each competency and make goals from that in that competency. So as we go along, we'll also see how these communicative competencies overlap. So the first one, like I said, is the linguistic competence defined. And so it is the ability to use and understand language. So for Matthew, we determined that his goals will be, for the linguistic competency, will be to increase the use of prepositions and increase his ability to state likes or dislikes. Now you're probably asking me, all right, but how did we get there, right? And I will talk a little bit about that, but it's good to know kind of the background of what is the linguistic competence. Why did we pick those goals? Well, because the linguistic competence is about our ability to use language expressively and to understand the meaning of language receptively, it involves like a long spectrum of skills, starting with basic functional communication all the way up to complex writing and reading skills. To be linguistically competent looks different to different people. If you're an SLP, which it seems like most of us are on this call, then you already have a good understanding of what it means to have receptive and expressive language skills that are developmentally on track. Basically, linguistic competence refers to how well we understand and use language. So, like I said, I'm going to walk you through the rationale for how we chose the increased use of prepositions and increase the ability to state likes and dislikes. So next, we'll go through some ways to measure linguistic competence to obtain a baseline and measure progress. Then we'll plug these two objectives into the goal attainment scale so that you can get an idea how to use the AAC goal framework for which it was created. Okay? Can you see my screen now? Okay, thank you so much for telling me. I'm not sure what happened. I must have somehow, when I clicked out of that poll, I must have stopped sharing my screen. So I appreciate you letting me know. All right, so to go over, and I'll just show you the last slide, because it seems like some of you missed that. So for linguistic, we're going to think about that typical language development. So we've got, like I mentioned, core vocab, functions of communication, Brown stages of development that we can all use to kind of measure or determine what target areas to work on. So the first one I'll just go over is Brown stages of development. You know, this is a really great place to start if you want to think about, you know, I have a lot of teams that'll tell me, oh, we've got to make sure he's saying, you know, 3 or 4 word phrases. And I'm like, let's think about how language develops. Like, do our kids come out talking in, you know, 4 or 5 word sentences? No, they start with 1 word and then they add something like that. So kind of using that as like a baseline or a way to test, you know, where they are can be really helpful. So this is one tool that you can see. And also on ASHA, there's a lot of different Brown stages of development that you can use. And some of these resources are in your handouts. We also have the quad profile here. That's something, I don't know if anyone's used that before. That's on the AAC Language Lab as well. You can find it in a couple other sources too. But another great tool designed actually for the field of AAC. Again, it's going to provide you with just checklists about vocabulary, morphology, syntax, and function. So the link for the free quad profile is in your handout. So just keep in mind that language learning for people who use AAC is usually different, right? They have a reduced means of expressing language, difficult initiating and controlling interactions, reduced opportunities to express, and you know that vocabulary and content that's supplied by the AAC system, which may be a less robust vocabulary than what they need to adequately express themselves. So we really need to, when we use these developmental frameworks, it's important to keep in mind, you know, that it was for language learning under typical circumstances. Okay? Just a little caveat there. The other thing I want to point out is another tool is called Functions of Communication by Janice Light. I actually love this one. It kind of proposed these 4 different general functions of communicative, 4 general categories of communicative functions, that's what I meant to say. So you have communicating wants and needs, exchanging information, developing social closeness, and fulfilling social etiquette. So these are maybe some of the reasons why we communicate. For early communicators, this is a really great place to start. You can write goals that will show an increase in the number of communicative functions expressed and used appropriately by the child. So this is just a small part of another training that we offer, but it's also in your handout packet and can serve as a place to start. So the first column is communicating wants and needs. This goes beyond requesting foods, drinks, and toys. It includes things like requesting attention, requesting activities. Another thing you can look at, and again, this is all kind of related to that linguistic competence. The next main area of that is exchanging information. This includes things like asking and answering questions, labeling, sharing objects, sharing objects and events, stating opinions, negotiating, things like that. And the last main area of that is social closeness and etiquette. So social closeness means those things that you typically do with someone who is close to you, family and friends. This would be things like expressing feelings, commenting, taking turns, gossiping, which is probably one of my favorite. Perfect. So to keep going, there's a lot of different tools that look at the function of communication differently. Here's another one of the quad profile. It divides language functions based on 7 types of functions. So you'll see here, you see the quad profile and it has different functions of communication again. So like I said, you're going to see these in a lot of different places. The other thing we wanted to draw attention to as a way to measure linguistic competence is core vocab. As you know, probably a lot of you do know, that core vocabulary are those words that make up a majority of what we say. What we know about core is that it allows for flexibility, novel generation. It's useful across contexts. It can be combined to increase semantic and syntactic complexity. It just does all of this stuff. Oops, I apologize. It just does all of this stuff that can really, really help. And it really, at the end of the day, it overlaps with academic core vocabulary and literacy. This is an important part of that linguistic competence that really might help you kind of determine what are some good goals. There are lots of different resources on core vocabulary lists. In your handout, you have a collection of early core words from Banaji and Van Tatenhove studies. These can be helpful too to kind of see, okay, what are some words, maybe top words that are used by toddlers. Oh, maybe some of these words my client is using, but others are not. Maybe I can focus on the ones that they are not using, things like that. That can be helpful as well. All right. There looks like to be some discussion, but I think all the charts are in your handout. But please let me know if, or Heather, my lovely moderator who's helping me out today, please let her know if you guys need anything. All right, so how did we decide upon these 2 objectives for Matthew? Well, we took a few of the resources we had available to us and we thought about his language, okay? So what we have so far is when we started thinking about Matthew's core vocabulary, we weren't really sure which core words he was currently using. So we created an inventory, like a lot of you guys mentioned, those language samples, of all of his language, whether it was signed, a word approximation, or generated using NovaChat. And this was based on parent report and observation. So you can see of all the different words that he used. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but you can see some signs, some words, and then also words on the NovaChat that he did use. And then what we did is now with that word inventory, we compared this to the early language lists from Banaji and Gail Van Tatenhove. And then we reflected on what he has or what he doesn't have in his language use. So, you can kind of see what he has. Those are the words that are highlighted. All right. So then if we think about next, okay, what words might be appropriate to target next based on what would be the most functional for Matthew? What would be the most functional and most, motivating for him to learn to use? And so simply highlighting these words allowed us to see where some target vocabulary might be. We decided we wanted to teach him how to use more prepositions because prepositions are words used and understood early in language development. You can see a lot of them right on that top words used by toddlers list. They're not currently in his repertoire either. And we could easily think of some structured play activities that we could incorporate prepositions that would be fun and motivating for him, okay? So you kind of see here, I actually circled all the different prepositions. So you have in, off, on, out, all of these that he's not using yet. Okay. The next thing we did is then we also took a look at the inventory of his functions of communication. So when we think about Matthew, we know that he communicates to request objects. We know he communicates to direct preferred actions like go and stop. We know he labels. We know he denies. We know he says bye and things like that. So, then we kind of thought of, well, what function might be appropriate to strengthen and target next? And then what will make the most difference in the life of Matthew, right? And this is when you realize there are so many things to work on. How do you decide what to work on next, right? I've been there. I know how it feels. His team had expressed concern that right now he currently shuts down when he doesn't like something. So we decided to work on stating his opinion, like an introductory level of like or don't like. So he can start to do more with his language and self-advocate. We already know that he has things that he has a strong preference for and against, like the loud noises, so we can use that information. So once you know what you want to work on, you are ready to brainstorm what might that look like as a goal and objective, and then how to get there. So again, his linguistic competency goals would be to increase the use of prepositions and increase the ability to state likes or dislikes. And then it's just as easy as putting it all in here, right? And we don't have to do anything else. It's super, I'm kidding. I will walk you through this, but don't worry that this handout is in your packet that you have access to. So we're going to walk you through writing one of these two objectives so you can kind of think a little bit more about the process and how it might look like for your client or student. So first, you write his name up on the top. We say it's a linguistic competency. We write the goal. So our overall goal is to increase prepositions. And we kind of maybe put some ideas of what to do for those prepositions, which prepositions to work on. And then using the information discussed, we describe his baseline. What can Matthew do now as it relates to his prepositions? Well, right now he doesn't use any prepositions, but he does use sign or verbalize 18 core words. So we know he has some ability there. Based on that baseline info and Matthew's learning style, we can decide what will be expected to achieve during the IEP year. Well, we said Matthew will target 6 prepositions to direct action during a structured play activity with minimal support. Okay, so we kind of made that as 6 target prepositions, and then we decided, okay, but how are we going to get there, right? And this is kind of where, how will we measure change? How are we going to kind of, right? That's what goals are. We have to measure change and how we're going to show growth. So we're going to write a step that would be in between where he is now and where he is expected to go. So this would be like Matthew will target 6 prepositions during direct action, during structured play given moderate support. So if you notice there, we changed the support level. Okay, there's not one right way to do this. The way you write it will highly depend on your experience, the client, where you're working, all that good stuff. And then if Matthew were to meet his goals, what would you want him to do next? Well, I would want him to target prepositions in less structured activities, okay? Because my final ultimate, best long-term goal for him would be that he could do it spontaneously when appropriate. We'll use those 6 target prepositions spontaneously when appropriate. So you can see that we didn't necessarily do this in direct order, but it kind of helps you figure out maybe how to write it and how that's helpful for you. So this is how it looks. Ta-da! We've completed one objective with benchmarks for a functional skill for Matthew as it relates to his linguistic abilities. If you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry. The areas that you really need to do are the objective, the baseline, and level 3. Once you have those, you'll be able to fill in the other 3 levels by adding or changing some of the things we already discussed, like support or number of environments or number of opportunities, okay? So then you would just take a little breath and you do the same thing on the other side. At this time, I'm not going to walk you through this one. You can just see that in your packet, you'll have it already all done. So just a quick thing, you'll do that increase abilities to state likes. We know that his baseline is to say no when he asks do you want, and he plugs his ears or rocks when he experiences things he doesn't like. And then we also know, Matthew will express like to indicate satisfaction for 10 node preferred items when asked his opinion. So we know that's something that maybe he could do. Okay. Teresa, great question. What's the timeline? That is up to you. And could the levels be considered objectives? Yep, I'm getting there, Jill. I'm getting there. So this is what it would look like. All right. So you can see what we did here was we changed how many items he would express like for. So when asked what think, he can do 5 for maybe like a benchmark. And then the annual goal could be something like do 10 items. Okay. So how might I translate these into an IEP or other format I'm already using? Which I think, Jill, that was your question. And how do I help ensure Matthew can reach these objectives? And what will working on these objectives look like? These are usually the questions we get after this. So let me show you what it would look like. So we translate it to another format. And again, this is in your handout. One option is to attach it and treat it like a rubric if you want to. You can also take the information and translate it into whatever form you need. Here we kind of did it into more of like an IEP-based form. So we kind of had this overall goal, which was Matthew will increase his expressive language skills, his linguistic competency. And then we kind of used his baseline as the present level. So we said, he can express those 18 core words. He says no when he doesn't like some, when do you want? He plugs his ears or rocks when experiencing things he doesn't like. And then what we did is we took those kind of 2 level 3s, and those became those objectives. Because remember, level 5 is not really, that's beyond maybe an annual goal, right? That's when we hope that he can use that in all the different contexts and everything like that. That's really hard to measure, so that's just kind of like an overall goal. Here we really want to look at level 3 as maybe more of the main objectives, okay? So level 3 will be Matthew will use those 6 target prepositions, and then Matthew will use express like. Right? Does that help answer some of the questions? I just want to make sure I got to all of them. Yep. Okay. So, in that case, Teresa, step 3 would be the time frame 6. That depends on your client. Truly depends on your client. You guys, and it depends on your facility too. I worked in a clinic and we had to review every 6 months. So my goals might look a lot different than like an IEP annual goal where I know I have a year to meet that, right? So just some things to consider, and it really just depends on your environment. That's why we made this framework for you, but it's able to easily be interpreted to where you are. Okay. And then, this is something else. I think sometimes that when we write goals, we need to think not only about the goals and skills of the individual using the device, but also those who will be working with the individual. So for this first objective using prepositions, the communication partner may need to know, where are the words in the vocabulary? Do they know how to use Word Finder to find those words? Since the objectives includes given aided language input, the communication partner needs to know what this includes. Yep, so just some things to think about. Maybe they need to know where those target words are within the vocabulary, like the word like, know those things Matthew likes or doesn't like. And then it's really good to this is another tool for communication partners, to make sure everyone knows what the prompts should look like for cueing and then fading the cues for certain skills. Your team might have something else that helps you relay those nuances of prompting and fading for certain skills. So just knowing that these are, just little note cards that you could make to kind of help them set up an activity in the classroom or, to the parent when they go home so that they know what to do and kind of help you meet those goals. All right, so again, this is in your handout, and I don't want to take all the time by going through it because I still want to make sure we get to the end of today's section, but this can be helpful too. I did see a question here. Karen asked, IEP goals should be measurable, however, this goal is not measurable, just the objectives. Any thoughts about how to write the goal to be measurable? It's a great point. So really, Karen, if I look back at, and I'm just going to step back really quickly and look at my goals here. So here I'm making level 3 as my measurable goal. Okay, we have not yet made it a SMART goal. Okay, that will come at the end. Actually, so at the end of day 2, so tomorrow, After that training, towards the end of that training, we will review all the goals and make them SMART goals. So here, Matthew will target 6 prepositions to direct action during structured play given minimal support. Here, I agree, it's not a SMART goal yet. We would need to add a time to it. And honestly here, we don't necessarily need to, I mean, you can write a percentage if you want, but here, we're targeting the 6. So that's the goal he needs to meet, is to use 6 with minimal support. So we are giving some of those, and we just need to make it time bound, but then it is specific and measurable. And listing from the baseline, as Heather pointed out, to the desired level can be helpful to see how that does grow. So like I said, again, this is how we are interpreting the goals. You can always, do what you need to do to make it meet the needs of your district or your clinic or your hospital, wherever you are. But I do agree that, it needs to be a little bit more of a SMART goal, and we'll get there. That's why the SMART is featured at the end, because towards the end, we will get to making sure all of these goals are SMART. Okay. I hope that helps answer your question. So next, we've got about 15 minutes left. Yep. So I want to go over the next competency, which is operational competency. And this is defined as the goal for the person who uses AAC to operate their system independently. Okay, so it's the technical skills involved in using the AAC system. We want to teach people who use AAC the mechanics of their technology so that they can build independence and self-advocacy skills. For Matthew, we chose speak the message by using the SMART period and to carry his device himself. Now we will talk about the rationale for choosing those 2 objectives before we take a look at the goal framework. Okay, so why did we choose those 2 objectives? So here, unlike the linguistic skills, there aren't any formal assessments or checklists for what operational skills are required. In your handout, you will have one brainstorming tool, and this is what we will use today. We are going to provide a few examples of skills and then walk you through writing one operational objective for Matthew. Again, this is a brainstorming tool. It's not a comprehensive list, and it's not a hierarchy. These are just some ideas to be considered on an individual basis. So when different access methods are needed, this can really change. Right? So again, operational is really those technical skills involved with using the AAC. It could be selecting the battery status button to tell us, what the battery status is. So that way we know if they need to charge the device. So if you can kind of see with the example of charge the device, there are just a few different ways Matthew or someone could display operational competence here. You can use that select battery status button. You can use a pre-programmed message to indicate the device needs to be charged. Or you can bring the device to a charging station. Maybe you have a charging station in your classroom, in the clinic, or at home that everybody's working on. That could be helpful as well. Okay. Another thing to work on in this competence is utilizing a dynamic display. So for example, knowing the home button takes you back to the home screen, or the lock button will keep you on a current page instead of bouncing you back home. Or the arrow takes you to another page of similar vocabulary words. These are all things to consider as an operational competency. Here are additional examples too. So using the SMART period to speak your message, maybe using the clear button or holding down the X to clear the message from the speech display bar. That could be something to work on. Using lock page button to remain on the page. I've kind of talked about that a little bit more, but just so you can kind of see some of those different options for utilizing a dynamic display. Operational also talks about access. And when we talk about access, we're really talking about how the person uses and makes selections on the device. So there's a direct selection with your finger, there might be head tracking, there might be switch scanning, and depending on the access method being used, you will likely have different skills to target. So, increasing speed may be related to how quickly someone can put 2 words together. It also might be achieved by decreasing the acceptance time, dwell time, or auditory prompt, but it can just look different. So that's just another again, it depends on what you have and what your client is doing. Here are some other examples, some operational skills to target in terms of access. So you could target how to, wake up the device or turn it on, how to use the kickstand to be able to see the vocabulary on the screen, or to educate communication partners on where to get the device, mounting or positioning, just some different things to think about when we're thinking about access and how that might look different for different people. The other thing, if you're looking for a few resources to help determine possible steps or processes involved in developing skills related to access, both of these break down the hierarchy really nicely. So Linda Burkhart, 2 Switches to Success, or Jane Corsten, I mentioned her earlier, Every Move Counts, Clicks, Chats. If access is not in place, it trumps the other competencies in terms of skills that need to be targeted, right? If they can't access the device, that's going to be really hard to target any other skills. So it does trump other ones. So to figure out what operational skills to target for Matthew, we went through this brainstorming tool and highlighted the things that he was doing and made comments about his skill level. So for example, we checked that he could adjust the volume button, but noted in the comments that he uses it but doesn't adjust it appropriately. Okay? So you can kind of see some other things too. He navigates independently. He clears message, but it's almost too quickly. He wakes up the device and he adjusts it for lighting. So based on what he can do, we selected 2 operational skills to target. So using the SMART period to speak the message is something that is completely new. But based on the fact that he was putting together 2 to 3 words, we wanted to make sure he's speaking his message as a whole. The other one is to carry the device. This is an emerging skill, but he's highly dependent on prompts to do this, so we would want to increase independence and frequency. So using that goal framework, we're going to brainstorm these 2 objectives to help Matthew increase his independence to operate the device. So what this will look like, again, you have this in your handout. To start, we'll write Matthew's name and check operational. And then we'll say his overall goal would be to speak the message in the SDB, or speech display bar, by using the SMART period so that his communication partners can hear the full message. Then using the information, what can he do currently? Well, right now we said, he selects those 2 to 3 words in sequence, but does not speak the entire message. Okay, so we wrote that in as the baseline. And then based on the baseline info and Matthew's learning style, we can decide what can be expected to achieve during the IEP year. And this is where we put, a way to do this. So Matthew will use the SMART period to speak his message of 2+ words with no more than 1 visual prompt. Okay, so highlighted button there. All right, so then we kind of discussed, all right, but how are we going to measure change? Okay, so what we decided here is actually to measure change, we'd put a verbal prompt in there too. So Matthew will use the SMART period to speak his message of 2+ words with no more than 1 visual and 1 verbal prompt. So we added that verbal prompt in there as kind of support to get him to that level 3 or expected goal. Okay. And then if Matthew were to meet this goal, what would you want him to do next? Our goal would be that he would do that, just give an expected wait time with no prompts. And then because our long-term goals was that he'd be able to do it independently, be able to use that SMART period to speak his message as appropriate. Okay. So then ta-da, you're done. And like I said, I'm not going to go through the other half, but you can kind of see here what we did on this side was just say that he will carry his AAC system with him for 5 daily transitions with 1 gestural prompt and verbal cue. Okay. And we kind of discussed what the verbal cue would be, which would be bring what you need. I think that's always important in goals to make sure we know what the verbal and visual or gestural prompt looks like, because that can be interpreted differently to different people. So I think that's very helpful. So then we say, what skills does his communication partner need to have in order for him to be successful with these 2 objectives? So first, the one thing they would need is they need to know the SMART period, and they need to know how to provide him with a gestural prompt and natural verbal cue. So what we can do is we can provide them a note card like this. So this is a tool for those other communication partners, like I mentioned before, the aides, the teachers, the parents, to help us relay the nuances of prompting and fading prompts for certain skills. So for this example, you might discuss how recently you introduced this objective may affect what prompt you begin with. For example, if you just began working on this, you might pair a direct verbal prompt and a gestural prompt. You hover your finger over the smart period button and say, try this. As this communication partner, of course, you will also be modeling use of the SMART period in structured and unstructured activities throughout the day. So you can see here, it gives the exact guidelines, like ask Matthew to speak the message in a speech display bar, like say it all together. Wait 5 seconds. If he doesn't respond, try to give him that little of a gestural cue, and then wait 5 seconds. If he selects that SMART period and responds naturally, you just congratulate him. Awesome, thanks for telling me. But if he doesn't select it, you do it for him and say, this is the SMART period. It says all your words together so that I understand. Something I really love about this is it doesn't say, okay, now you take his hand and make him do it. That's not the goal of AAC, is to make our kids, again, it's not compliance, it's for communication. So what I love here is it says, if he doesn't select that SMART period, you push it for him. I'm glad you like these, Karen. These is one of my favorite. Honestly, please use these communication partner cards or note cards, however you want to call them. I just think they're so important to make sure that people know, what to do. It's a lot of times, I've been in those situations. I've been in trainings where the team says to me, Liz, we have, 5 different systems with 8 different kids in our classroom. It's really hard to learn all these different things. And, I think this is one way you can do it, putting some of these little note cards on a little 3-ring thing that, is in their desk or something that the communication partner can look at quickly and be like, oh yeah, we're working on that. That's a really great part. So just some different things. I did get a question here. If the child picks up a skill faster but not yet meets the goal 100% of the time, how do you move forward? That's a good, and that's where I go with kind of that level 3 benchmark of just hitting kind of your goal that you want to do and then moving on. I think 100% is really hard. It's a hard accuracy to meet. So I think that's, but again, that's how you want to write that in your IEP or goal or however you want to do it. But just knowing that sometimes, that ability to generalize it into all the different contexts is really hard to take data on. So maybe just taking data on what you can see. And when they do meet it, then you move on and you hope that they generalize it. If you need to come back to it, that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong way to do this. But I think, that can be helpful. Is there a particular tool you use to create these, or do you handwrite them? That's a great example. Or a great question, sorry. So on this one here, we don't have a template, we don't have anything. I mean, you would write them as you wish. So I consider them as note cards that you could just handwrite. That's probably what I would do, but I think some people are really tech savvy and probably it'd be easier for them to do it on a computer. It's totally fine too. So it's really just dependent on how you want to do them. Good question. So if we move forward, just operational skills may not always be listed as a part of the IEP or a speech goal, but these skills should still be a part of your device plan towards communicative competence. And the other thing I like to talk about is that funding sources like Medicaid look for operational skills that a person can complete. Okay, so that can be really, really important. All right, so to move on, any questions? I saw someone put a really great example in the chat window that yes, for those communication partner note cards, you can use Chat Editor, if you're familiar with Chat Editor, to be able to copy and paste those button icons and put them, in something like a Word document for you to be able to give to the staff in the school or parents at home or other staff-related service providers that could help them. Follow us on NovaChat, Chat User Group, TouchChat User Group, Saltillo Brand, Twitter, Facebook. That's my contact information, liz.heisler@prc-saltillo.com. I'm so glad. This was great. Thank you.